Hi, this is Kevin. Welcome to the part one tutorial for the Jupyter Notebook assignment. Um, we're looking at the instructions for the assignment right here, and this assignment has a different pattern than the other ones that we've been doing in the course. In this assignment, you're going to be expected to follow along and to do all the work in the tutorial parts, okay? Uh, Most of the work is going to be kind of follow along, right? And then in a few key places, I'm going to have you go ahead on your own and do kind of a parallel activity to the one that we just did together. So it all needs to be handed in. So probably best to start right now with following along. Okay? There's a starter file associated with the exercise. You'll be able to download that from the weekly schedule. Okay? And it's a three-part tutorial. And let's take a look at what we're going to do in part one. Okay, so in part one, we're going to create the Jupyter create workbook. I think we want to say notebook. We're correcting as we go along. And we're going to add two sections, requirements and overview. For the most part, that's the documentation that is up at the top. Okay, so let's get started. I did a tutorial already about how to work with Jupyter and PyCharm at the same time. If you haven't played that yet, probably best to play that before this. Okay, so I need to get a new PyCharm project. So I'm working on my other monitor, and I went up to the menu and did a file new, and here's what I got. So my Python course projects. So what are we going to call this project? All right, well, right from the instructions, okay, it's going to be called your surname underscore given name and then Jupyter Notebook assignment. So for me, that's going to be trainer underscore Kevin Jupyter, there's a Y in Jupyter, notebook assignment. So that's what the project's going to be called. And one of the things I talked about in the last tutorial but didn't do is that when you're creating a new project, you can definitely choose the virtual environment that you want to use. So we go down to this Python interpreter entry and click on the triangle to expand it. And we want a previously configured interpreter. And we already configured one in the last of the tutorials that we did. And we called it E4 Jupyter Notebook Assignment. And here it is. Okay. And we're going to click on Create. And it asks me on another monitor, what window I want to use. I want a new window. Okay, and it has created it for me. Okay, good. In the last year or so, when you create a new PyCharm project, you get this main.py, which I'm never interested in. So I tend to delete it. That's what I'm going to do now. Okay. And in this project, we're going to have data. Okay. And we're going to put it in a subdirectory, a data subdirectory. Okay. It's probably a pretty good practice for these data cleaning projects. So I'm going to highlight the name of the project, right click, and I say I want a new directory And I'm just going to call it data, all lowercase. Okay, and we'll see that that's popped up there. Okay, and while we're at it, we're going to download the starter file. Okay, and what I have here is I haven't actually put it up on the server yet, but the starter file is going to be zipped up like this. So it's going to be called starter files for Jupyter notebook assignment.zip. And when we expand it, we're going to have this directory, and we're going to have raw data.txt. And I'm just going to highlight raw data.txt, and I'm going to choose copy. And now I'm going to come over and I'm going to highlight my data subdirectory. I'm going to right click and choose paste. And it looks like it wants to use raw data.txt as a name. That's fine. Okay, and I've got the Git version control software enabled on the file system that I'm in now. This probably won't happen to you, so I'm not going to talk about this part. So it has opened up our test data. Okay, so what are we doing in this project? Well, we're kind of practicing cleaning some data. Okay, with the anticipation that we're going to be working with the Jupyter notebook. Most people use these notebooks for data analysis, and one of the first things that they need to do is that they need to assess the data that they have and see if it's really sufficiently clean for the analysis that they plan. Okay, and if it's not, then if they have some cleaning tools, they'll use that to clean the data. And that's going to make it easy to do the analysis. So we have a file here. It's got 1,000 records, 1,000 lines of text. So if we go all the way down to the bottom, we'll see that line number 1001 gets formed when we put the new line at the end of line number 1,000. So really have 1,000 records, okay? And we have a city name, a comma, a state name, a comma, and an integer, okay? And you can kind of see from looking at the state name, the first one is all caps Pennsylvania, and they look kind of okay for a while. Okay, but if you go down, we're going to find out that these are in all kinds of capitalizations, and some of them have an extra space on the end and things like that. And that's true for the state names, that's true for the city names. And I generated the file from a program, okay? And what I did is I introduced coding error into about 10% of the city names and about 10% of the state names, okay? And I didn't do anything to mangle the integer values. This is just really a token value between 1 and 1,000, okay? Yeah, so if we took the mean, it'd probably be about 500, but it doesn't represent anything at all except some value that we're eventually going to want to analyze when we're done with the data cleaning, okay? So we're going to do the cleaning on the city name and the state name. How did I come up with the city names? Well, I went and found a list of common city names in the United States, and I took the top 20 of them. So we have 20 different city names. And what do they do for the names of the states? I went and I found the 10 U.S. states with the highest population, and I used them. Okay, so this is generated. I have data where about 10% of the entries for the city and the state are mangled in some way. Okay, and what we're going to do is we're going to figure out how they're mangled, and we're going to try to we're going to create a program to cure the problems and put them back in a scheme that will help us to um, analyze the data in some subsequent step. Okay, so these are the data right here. Okay, raw data dot text. All right, that's that. All right, now we're going to want um, we're going to want a notebook. Okay, so what are we going to call it? Well, here's what we're going to call it. We're going to highlight the name of the project, right click, and say we want a new Jupyter notebook. Okay, and let's call it the following thing. Okay, uh, data cleaning workflow example. Okay, and let's give it a name in uh, snake case. Okay, data underscore cleaning underscore workflow underscore example. And we don't have to add the .py because PyCharm is going to do that for us. And it gets opened up, and as you can see, we're in the editor for Jupyter Notebooks, and we are ready to type content into the top cell. Okay. And one trick that we can use to get it to fire up the server um, is to process a cell in a way that it has to fire up the server. And I've tried that by adding a markdown cell at one time or other, and that didn't seem to do it. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to put in some Python. I'm going to make this a code cell. And I'm going to say print goodbye cruel world. Okay, so I have this. And if I want to process a cell, I do a shift enter. And if we look down the bottom, you can see that it's cranked up the server for us. Okay, now we could have started the server ourselves, but I think this is sort of the easiest way to do it when we're working with PyCharm and Jupyter together. Okay, and we can already see over here in the version that shows the output, because we're in this side-by-side view, we can see the output, goodbye cruel world. Okay, that's great. No, we're not really going to want to keep this, but this was a trick to get it to fire up the server. And if we go down the bottom in the left a tab, we can see that's the server tab. Okay, and it's got a bunch of links and things for us. You can see that we're using Jupyter Notebook 6.4.5. And the version that we need to use is whatever version our Anaconda is using. So we want to be using Python 3.8, and right now it looks like from Anaconda we're getting Jupyter Notebook 6.4.5. That looks good. Okay, and then we'll get down the bottom and we'll take one of these links, and we're going to use that to open Chrome. So we're going to ask for a new Chrome window. Okay. and we're going to paste in the URL, and there we are. And you can see that we're in the data subdirectory, and one file that we have here is data cleaning workflow example.ipnb. That's our workbook, notebook. All right, so let's click on that, and we'll open the page for that. And we see we have a single cell, okay, and it's a code cell. Okay, now that was just a trick to get the notebook and get the server fired up. We're not going to leave it this way. So I have an already baked version of this, okay? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull it over, and I'm going to show you the project that we're trying to create, okay? We're going to have a title at the top, data cleaning workflow example. And that's going to be the biggest of the titles. That's the equivalent of the HTML H1, okay? And then we've got some sub sections here that have, it's the equivalent of H2 titles. So we have a section for requirements, we have a section for overview. Later on, we're going to have a section for raw data, and it's going to have sub sections that have H3 titles, one called configure, and now we finally see some code. And then we have analyze city name values, and we see some code. And when we run the analysis, we see what's really there. So we have a count of all of the different versions of the city names. And you can see we've got some duplicates because they're not going to match when we analyze them because we changed the, we mangled them a bit. Okay. So we're going to analyze the city name values, and then we're going to analyze the state name values, and they're going to have some problem because they've been mangled too. And then we're going to have a section for correct data coding errors, and that's going to have a configure subsection that has some code. And then we're going to create a correction program, and here's where we run it. And then having run the program that cleans the data, then we're going to analyze it again, and we're going to show that the mangling's all gone. We've cleaned it up, and that's going to be the end. So that's what we're building right now. We're going to build the title, requirements, and overview. Okay, I think that's what we're doing. Let's look at the instructions again to be absolutely sure. Is that it? Yep, that's what we're doing. Okay, so what's our title supposed to be? Well, it's supposed to be data cleaning workflow example. So we need the top cell to be a markdown cell. So let's get rid of the code. Let's change it to markdown. All right, and we're going to use a single pound sign and a space to say that we want an H1 level title. Okay, and we're going to call it data cleaning workflow example. Okay, and we're going to do a shift enter to execute that, and there's our title. All right, and now we're going to have a section heading called requirements. So again, let's turn this into Markdown, and we're going to use 2 pound signs to get 2 pound signs in a space to get an H2 level title, and we're going to call it requirements. Okay. And let's do a shift enter. There we go. Now, are we done with that requirements markdown cell? No, we're not. We're going to bring over some copy. Okay. We've got more copy to go in that cell. That's all one markdown cell. So let me bring over, let me be working on the right copy of the browser. Okay, so let's click on this cell that has requirements. And if we double click on the text requirements, we can get to start. And we're just going to put a carriage return or enter at the end of the line. And then we're going to begin to type on the new line. Okay, so what do we want to type? Well, we've got two different messages that we want to include. Here's the first one. This notebook requires a virtual environment that includes packages for Python 3.8 and Jupyter. Okay, so that really tells us what the requirements are for the notebook in terms of what virtual environment has to be in place and what the packages are. And then we're going to skip a line, and now we're going to have another line, which is really a paragraph, I guess. And it's going to say, this notebook is included in a PyCharm project. It makes use of Python code from within the PyCharm project directory. Okay, so that's all the copy that we went for that markdown cell. So now we can do a shift enter again. And we've got some pretty looking documentation. So what's the next section that we want to do? Well, we want to do an overview. Oh, okay. Again, in the readings that I had you do for this week's assignment, there was a paper that we read about good practices for notebooks. And I think the first thing that they said is tell a story, right? Well, what's the story? What are we doing in the notebook? Well, that's what we're going to tell in the overview. Okay, so let's make this a markdown cell. And let's give it a level 2 title called overview. Okay, and let's put some stuff in here. Okay, we don't need to skip a line before we start because it's going to hold that H1 title away from our first paragraph. So let's say this sample workflow cleans a raw data file to produce a cleaned data file. Okay. Sample workflow cleans a raw data file to produce a cleaned data file. Okay. And it's pretty typical to talk about data that have coding errors and all, and it's the data just as we got it. It's pretty typical to call it raw data. Okay, and after we clean it, it's pretty typical to call it cleaned. Okay, the one thing we don't want to call it is cooked. All right, raw and cooked are two terms that seem to contrast with each other. And the term cooked data doesn't have the pejorative sense that it once had long ago when I went to grad school. But when I went to grad school, if you cooked your data, it meant that you manipulated it to get exactly the results that you wanted. instead of doing some kind of scientific inquiry that led you to the results that were in the data to begin with. Okay, so cooked hasn't got the pejorative sense that it once had, but I think we definitely want to say cleaned rather than cooked. Okay, so what else do we want to say? Well, let's see the next thing that I have here in the documentation that we're going to add. Next paragraph. Each record contains 3 fields separated by commas: city name, state name, integer value. We suspect coding errors in city name and state name fields. No errors are expected in the integer value field. Okay. And why do we know this about the file? Well, because Kevin invented it with programs, so we know a lot about the properties of the file. We typically won't, though. Okay, and then we're going to have 1/3 and final paragraph. Let's add that. Okay, I'm just going to paste mine in, and you're going to type yours. Okay, and it's going to say, this workflow will analyze values for the city name and state name fields to expose data coding problems. Then a correction program will be coded and run to repair as many of the error values as possible. Finally, the analysis of city names and state names will be run again to demonstrate that coding errors have been resolved in the clean version of the data file. And let's do a shift enter on that, and then we've got that. So a couple of ideas here. One, we need some kind of a section that explains what's going on in the notebook, because even if it's only for us, if enough time goes by, like a half a year or a year, and we come back, we're not going to remember the details. Okay, and if we share it with colleagues or the public, well, they're going to have the same problem. Okay, and having documentation at the top is one of the advantages of using this kind of notebook. Okay, the other thing that we've described here is that we're not going to change the raw data. Okay, the raw data are going to remain as they were. Okay, that's going to allow us to rerun this as many times as we want and to demonstrate that it's still possible to do. Okay, we're able to reproduce the work. All right, and it's going to have an output file, a cleaned data output file. Okay. So that is all that we're going to do for part 1. I'm going to see you in a couple of minutes when we come back with part 2. So see you there. Bye-bye.